We will be moving to the First Unitarian Church on Linton Street starting next week. Couple things. The parking lot is directly across the street from the main entrance of First Unitarian. Right next to the fence are all of the handicapped parking spots. Please park as close to that fence as possible because First Unitarian shares that parking lot with Tri-Health. So if you get over to the Tri-Health side of that parking lot, they have a security guard there that may tow your car. Stay close to the fence side directly across the street from the church. Yeah, right there, right across the street where the handicap spots, there is a, yeah, right, there is a fence right there. And then, so, you know, the next 2 rows of parking would probably be the most beneficial. On your tables, I have half-sheet order forms. This is for box lunches from Venice on Vine. This is Sister Judy and Venice on Vine, and she has a community effort that employs those who have been incarcerated, and she works with them to teach them skills. And so this is why we started first off to support Venice on Vine. We will do this for 2 weeks. Then we will have a conversation on July 9th as to what we want to do for the next week. So we're going to take this as it comes because, you know, we're kind of shooting from our hip here. You know, we're listening that folks wanted to change, and so we are going to do that. So please, if you want to order a box lunch, put your name on this paper, circle what you want to eat, and give it to me before you leave today. Otherwise, Peter's going to put in the newsletter that you may email me, don't call me, email me by 11:30 on Monday, the day before our meeting, with your order. I will be meeting with Sister Judy at noon to give her the orders. If you decide to call me or send an email at 1 o'clock after that, too bad. Pack your lunch. You are welcome to pack your lunch anytime you want. So it's great. You can bring whatever you want. We have to make sure we're courteous. We will clean up the tables afterwards. You know, we are sharing this space. We will ask for a little contribution to cover the cost of the space, but I think if everybody chips in $1 or $2, we will be able to be in good stead. So please, before you leave, if you want a box lunch and you're here, please give me this order now. You will pay for it when the lunches arrive next Tuesday. Yes, Mike?
Bring your own beverages?
Bring your own beverages.
Does that include wine? Is that allowed?
I wish. No, you're whining, but no wine.
No, I mean, am I allowed to bring mine?
Yes, you can bring wine. Yes, Peter.
Why are we moving to this location? That's a long story.
That's a really long story. Things are getting expensive here and cover charges and $5 for somebody coming in having a glass of water. You know, so it was, and plus people have been asking for a change, so we're listening, and we're going to try this for a little while. Who knows? In a couple months we might be back here. Okay? Yes.
Katie, when you have salads listed here, that's an alternative option?
That's an alternative option.
Is that just a typical green veggie salad?
Yes. Typical green veggie salad.
Charge people $5 for just sitting
Yes,
here.
or gluten-free option. That's right. So either the sandwiches or salad. Okay, any questions about any of this? Make sure you read the newsletter and have all that information at hand. Right, announcements. Mike.
Two questions.
What is House Bill 6? I've heard people talk about it. It's on TV and everything. And second, couldn't we up the pressure and go to Portman's neighborhood and raise heck, you know, standing out there with signs or Shabbats or whatever? Because they don't get to see any of this stuff. They're so sheltered. So I wondered if we could do that.
Militia. They'll bring out the militia.
lives.
I know exactly where Portland lives, it's right around the corner from my daughter. And yes, I have been out there, we were right out there on the street, and Harris Park Police didn't bother us, and then we're up there by the elementary school, and he couldn't have cared less. His wife did come out though,
Maybe we ought to do that more.
yeah, so who knows, I mean, we really do need to be visible. Just something on your calendar, I just heard that from Michelle Dillingham. July 12th is an action day to protest what's going on at the border with the children and the immigration. The places that they're talking about in our area is the Boone County Detention Center and the Butler County Detention Center. And they quite smartly, I guess, keep this away from the public. So in other words, they're tucked away. And so when we had an action up at Butler County Detention Center, nobody even knew the detention center was there. So Michelle Dillingham and several other folks are working on organizing a demonstration in a much more visible place. So we'll just get that on your calendar. July 12th is going to be actually a national day of action in protest about what's going on at the borders. So July 12th, and we're doing something here, don't know what it is yet, but we're definitely going to make a scene.
Can somebody tell me about House Bill 6?
I can, a little bit.
Yeah, Cedric Denson was very much opposed to it. He went on record as being opposed to it.
The House bill, it's in the Senate, I think, right now, and there's 2 power plants on Lake Erie, not power, but they're nuclear, thank you, nuclear plants on Lake Erie that are in bankruptcy at the moment because of the fracking, and the gas is so much cheaper than the nuclear. So they filed bankruptcy, and the bill is to get them bailed out.
Stupid.
Yes, but along with that, not just bailing them out, they have cut out all the green energy stuff that they had planned to put in and keep in. So it's really a dramatic, I think jobs will be lost, but they might just be shifted, but I just don't think they should be, if they're in bankruptcy. They should wait and see what happens after.
We should oppose
Yes.
House Bill 6.
Cedric did some research on this. He said 4,000 jobs in sustainability are going to be lost. So it's a washout in jobs. If they lose the jobs in the nuclear, or do we lose the jobs in sustainability? And I think we want to support movement towards sustainability than what we want to do nuclear energy.
They're waiting for the China syndrome.
Yeah.
Also, they're attributing the earthquakes that are happening in northeastern Ohio to the fracking. So if you have fracking underneath nuclear energy plants, probably not a good idea. It's bad.
That's a good movie.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
When we all turn green.
Pessimism of the mind.
The other detail regarding House Bill 6, Mike and everyone here, is that the users of those energy, of the power created by those nuclear energy plants are going to have an increment in their bills to cover part of the requirement to raise funds. So it's going to also impact energy users in the northern half of the state. So it's kind of like that pipeline mess that was coming, that wanted to be proposed for southern Ohio in our area that NOPE was fighting against, where the people who would be potentially benefiting from those gas pipelines would have to pay for their construction. So it's kind of the same way there. So if you want to, I'm a board member of a Jewish Environmental Awareness Alliance called Shomrei Olam, which is a Hebrew phrase for guardians of the earth. Their website, if you want to visit it to get more information about House Bill 6, we have some information there about it. It's SHOMREI. I'm spelling it out so you could write it down if you want.
put it on a card, I'll put it in the newsletter.
Okay, I'll do that as well. So it's, well, go back to the beginning, SHOMREI hyphen OLAM.org.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Katie?
Yeah, I'm a retired union electrician at Local 212 Cincinnati. And I've spent a lot of my 30 years working at the coal burners along Ohio River. This bill, when you read it, my union's in favor of it. I don't understand it because they think it's saving jobs. But it also includes a couple of coal burners. One of them is in Indiana. Now, how Ohio taxpayers can pay to subsidize a power plant in Indiana is beyond my reasoning. And part of the coal thing is, we all remember the acid rain. EPA has cut back on coal things, you know. So, you know, I'm kind of in a quandary about it because, yeah, maybe it'll save some jobs. But then what's the future like, and why didn't they just up your rates? Because they can't. Because they're no longer part of the Public Utilities Commission thingamabob. So now they come to you as taxpayers, and there's no limitation on it. How long are we going to be paying this extra money? So it's something to really think about and ask somebody a lot more knowing than I am. But
Katie?
Make sure it's on. You ready? It's not on. Push it up.
Hey, you got Michelle Dillingham. She was with Bill Wood's vegan group. I was there on Friday.
Sunday.
Sorry, Sunday. That's right. And I just want to say I'm glad you told us all about the options for lunch, because those vegans, none of them would join us if, I mean, you know, if they couldn't have a salad or something. They brought wonderful food to that Sunday thing. It was really, really great. And then I just wanted to throw in this, that the week before, let me see the yellow, IJPC person is here, that's great. It was at IJPC that we had our press conference by the Homeless Coalition that had their attorney speaking to us about their amended complaint that the Court of Judge Black has accepted most of the amended complaint so that they can name the mayor of the city.
Yes.
Yes, as a plaintiff in this case. And it was really fun to hear that. We heard some moving stories about a few people who had been arrested, you know, during the crackdown, what, a year ago. One woman was saying that she just walked and walked and walked. She didn't dare to stop. Finally, she fell asleep in a park and was arrested. Stories like that, you know. I mean, the tremendous number of homeless we have in this city. She said that they don't, the people that were on 3rd Street and all, and in other places later on, couldn't be anywhere. They just had to disappear, and nobody knows where most of them are. Said they don't know where. They considered them family, you know. Said we don't know where our people are.
Good afternoon, Marlena Brookfield, running for Cincinnati Public School Board this year. Thank you. Just a couple quick announcements. The first one is that this Saturday, the 29th, the Hamilton County Democrats Executive Committee is meeting, and they're going to be talking about their school board endorsements and the school levy. So I just want to put that call out. Everyone who's on the executive committee, so all our precinct executives, come to the Union Hall. It's on Montgomery Road this Saturday at 9:30. You need to be there because you will need to vote. I'll see you there. And for the July 4th parade in Northside, Brookfield for Board will be walking with Charmaine McGuffey for sheriff.
All right.
Yoo-hoo.
Okay, that's it? Alrighty. Today's speaker is Joelle Newman from the Peaslee Neighborhood Center. I got to know Joelle kind of like two ways. She comes to our Mount Auburn Community Council meeting and, you know, shares things that are going on at the Peaslee Center, and because our neighborhoods are like contiguous to each other and it gets a little testy from time to time about who has this property and who doesn't have, whether it's OTR, whether it's Mount Auburn. Let me tell you, some of our meetings are quite contentious. They're lots of fun. But Joelle and I really got to know each other through the collaboration of the Peaslee Neighborhood Center and the Cincinnati Educational Justice Coalition. They are one of our community partners when we started talking about tax abatement. And they have done just a tremendous amount of work developing an equitable development rubric. Just so that you understand the background to this, and Dick Galloway has talked to us about dark money. This is an example of dark money. In every single state around the country, the rich and powerful, the developers, got these laws into place and gave developers all this ability to have tax abatements with very little accountability. Texas, Pennsylvania, everywhere did you talk about, they are having the same difficulty. It's dark money run amok. They're in there, they're controlling things that are going on, they're putting representatives and senators in place in our Ohio House. They're putting people in place in community councils and townships. So in other words, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, how important it is that people are on the ground floor, that we are supporting people in all the races. Local is incredibly important. And so that is why the work that the Peaslee Center has done is just, it's mind-boggling and it's wonderful. And I've been sharing this with legislators. I'm going up again tomorrow to meet lobby day with legislators up in Columbus. And they have been so excited to see this because it's happening in all different cities and all different communities across Ohio. So Joelle, here it is.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for having me. Thank you, Katie, for the invitation. As she mentioned, my name is Joelle Newman, and I'm representing Peaslee Neighborhood Center. Historically, Peaslee hasn't necessarily been involved in development and kind of the way that neighborhoods have been impacted. We've historically been more enrichment and arts and cultural based. But with our experience, we're located in Over the Rhine, and we've been in Over the Rhine for almost 35 years this year. And the massive amount of change that we've seen in our neighborhood, and a lot of the families have seen that we serve in our neighborhood, really spurred us and impacted us into action for addressing a lot of the change and a lot of the things that contribute to gentrification, the loss of affordable housing, removal of people from their neighborhoods, long-term residents. And so kind of what brought us to this development of what we're calling the Equitable Development Rubric is just our own personal experience with gentrification in Over the Rhine. So the massive loss of affordable housing that we've seen in Over the Rhine, there's been about, within the last 20 years, about 2,300 units of housing lost at the lowest affordability rate. The impact that we've seen on our community anchors, we've lost neighborhood schools, and those schools have often flipped and turned into extremely expensive condos. We've lost a lot of public space. So one experience that we had specifically is what we're calling the Keep Our Courts Do Development Differently campaign. So around 2015, Right across from our last public school in our neighborhood, there was a developer who wanted to put 21 $500,000 homes right on top of public basketball courts, community garden, and community green space. And so it was first brought to the community council, and no one had engaged the school directly across the street, which serves students 99% who receive free and reduced lunch. No one had engaged the neighbors who lived directly on the space and the children who lived around the space until this meeting. And so the kids came back to Peaslee and they were like, well, how can these people take our courts and nobody asked me about my basketball courts and nobody asked me about my community garden. And so that's kind of when we first got involved, and we said, well, let's go find out how can people make these decisions and not even engage the community or stakeholders who utilize this space. So with that was kind of when we started doing deeper research into like who makes these decisions, how are these developers coming into these spaces, how are they funding their projects, and kind of more research into figuring out how are we transferring our public space, which is a public asset and taxpayer funded, and how are we transitioning that to private space to where it's no longer a public asset access, and no one is able, like not everyone is able to access it. So kind of what we found is that what's been happening in Cincinnati isn't new or solely happening in Cincinnati. It's happening into cities all around the country. And it comes kind of from a history of uneven development. So when we think about uneven development, the market and the way that people have invested in neighborhoods hasn't been done equally or equitably or evenly in our neighborhoods. So that has contributed to what we see kind of in Cincinnati with issues along segregation, along the issues of class or across race. And with that uneven development, and after generations and generations of uneven development, we have our areas of concentrated wealth, and then we have our areas that have seen a lot of years of disinvestment. So then city officials kind of look at these areas that have seen disinvestment and a lot of market money has not been invested in, and they're like, well, we kind of want you to come in and we don't have the funds for this, we don't have the budget for this, we don't have the financial capital. And so they look back to private developers who were kind of the reason for this disinvestment and ask them to come and reinvest in these disinvested neighborhoods. And so kind of with that comes the use of public subsidies. So when we talk about public subsidies, we talk about our public land, we talk about our zoning changes. So when we change our zoning from what it typically is in order to make a private project work, or we talk about tax abatement. So when we abate or we don't ask for taxes in private development. And so Peaslee sees those incentives and those subsidies as the public backing these private projects. So it's as if the public is a business partner in these efforts to make sure that this project succeeds. But what we've been seeing happening is that when the public is backing these projects don't necessarily contribute to equity or contribute to the betterment of our communities, but in turn they result in, like I mentioned before, loss of affordable housing, loss of public space that the public rarely is able to ever regain, and then also a lot of loss in public capital because we're abating these taxes for projects that aren't bringing any good to our communities. So when we were looking at developing a tool, we were kind of just looking at more transparency. Initially, we were looking at more transparency in the process between the developer and then also with the community which they're building in. Because a lot of times, the developer isn't engaging directly with the community, but is rather engaging with higher level decision makers, and then coming back to the community and saying, well, this is where we're going to put in your space without ever engaging the community in any way. So we see public subsidies and incentives such as tax abatements, zoning changes, and public land as the public backing, and they should only be used in private efforts when they benefit the public. So when we say that, we kind of only think it should be used in areas that bring, address kind of the things that I mentioned before regarding like segregation and racial equity in our city. And so we believe that this kind of public investment in private development is only worth it if the project brings significant community benefits that is otherwise difficult for the community to realize. And so our approach is that solutions should be baked into how we do public business. And so we think that anytime that a developer is asking for the public backing through the form of a zoning change, through the form of public land, and through the form of a tax abatement, that they should be bringing real, tangible public goods with them. And so we developed the rubric, which offers a transparent way to evaluate development and what the development project is bringing to the neighborhood. So rather than kind of behind the scenes and the developer isn't necessarily being as transparent and open with the community, we have specific steps that allow the community to know exactly what the developer is asking for their subsidies. What is the developer asking for of your taxpayer assets? What is the developer specifically bringing into your neighborhood? And then how is that going to impact your community within a long term? And so with that, we're employing a grassroots strategy, and so we're moving from the ground up in order to pressure our higher level decision makers to be better stewards and be more responsible with our public assets. And so we've been going kind of community to community as well as group organization to group organization to build a broader base on the ground in order to make sure that we're pressuring rather than from a top-down perspective, but pressuring from the bottom up. And then we're also offering an opportunity to just raise the bar citywide in order to make sure that when we do development, it's not solely we're backing up projects in the same types of neighborhood. Oftentimes we've seen that when the public is back or when there's being tax abatements or public land or all these public incentives used, they're not necessarily in the neighborhoods that have seen disinvestment as if the neighborhoods that have seen disinvestment, but rather the neighborhoods where there's concentrated wealth or that are quickly gentrifying, where the market is already hot and cranking, developing a lot of different areas. And so we want to kind of even the playing field to make sure that all neighborhoods are offered the opportunities to have good development, but development isn't forced down the throats of communities, specifically who may have seen disinvestment historically, and then it's just any type of development is given to that community, and then for the sake of saying like, oh, well, you haven't seen development or you haven't seen financial investment, so you have to take whatever. So we want to lift the bar across the city and not just continue to entice the same type of development in the same neighborhoods. And so the rubric at the heart of our kind of toolkit itself is what we're calling a rubric. And so the rubric itself consists of 4 main categories. It consists of housing affordability, jobs and labor, community input, and then a piece that we call community footprint. With the community footprint piece, it kind of developed out of our experience with that Keep Our Courts campaign, which was, it's a kind of an anti-displacement piece. So it's asking what is currently on the space, and then are you removing what's on the space? Are you enhancing what's on the space? Is that a community asset? Is that something that the community depends on and stakeholders around the area depends on? So that's the category of community footprint. And the way that we developed it is it's informed by best practices in other cities, and it incorporates existing standards that are used elsewhere in Cincinnati. So we didn't want to create something where then we had to define each step. We use everything in our rubric already utilizes standards that we have around Cincinnati. So in our jobs and labor category, when we think about prevailing wage and a living wage, those are things that we already have within our standards in Cincinnati. So why aren't we asking and ensuring that when developers say they're bringing jobs into our communities, that they're prevailing wage jobs and jobs that are sustainable to the neighborhood economy? And so we recommend with our rubric that each developer at least score 50% before being offered an opportunity to score themselves in bonus categories. And so the bonus categories consist of diversity and inclusion, public space and infrastructure, natural environment, community organizations and community programs, and then also local enterprise. And so we see those kind of just as important, but our 4 main categories are the categories that we really see as addressing the issue of race and class when we think about the way that development can contribute to our neighborhoods more equitably. So since we are employing the grassroots strategy, we are seeing this as a policy framework eventually, especially when we think about the way that City Council has been thinking about the tax abatement conversation as well as development in general. So we have demands going on with our rubric, and so we're requiring that projects in the neighborhood reach at least a minimum rubric scoring before receiving our public subsidies. So before receiving tax abatements, before receiving zoning changes, that they should at least bring in a 50% across all neighborhoods. And then for concentrated wealth neighborhoods as well as highly gentrifying neighborhoods, we're raising the bar to a 75%. We want to enforce compliance with the agreed upon. So after the neighborhood and the community has agreed to support a project with our public money, we believe that there should be an enforcement piece after the project is finished to ensure that those agreed upon standards are for the duration of the public investment. So if we're talking about a 15-year tax statement, we should have, if we agree to a certain level of affordability in the housing that you're bringing, that level of affordability should remain there for the 15 years that your tax statement is there. And then we also believe that there should be a reevaluation because neighborhoods rapidly change. And so maybe the score that Over the Rhine would have gotten 15, 20 years ago isn't necessarily the score that Over the Rhine would be looking for in today's time. So consistently reevaluating and working with neighborhoods to ensure that the scoring expectation changes with the changing of the neighborhood. And so, as I mentioned, this is a grassroots strategy, so we're have different levels and ways people can get involved. On an individual level, we're just asking people to kind of spread the word about the rubric any way that we have the opportunity, connecting us to different groups, connecting us to different community councils, and then we're also currently working on other equitable pieces such as the tax abatement conversation, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and the kind of tenant organizing that's been going on specifically in lower income housing. And so we're working on a platform in equitable development in general, and the rubric is kind of a piece of that. And so we have a steering committee that we have every first Thursday of the month at Peaslee Neighborhood Center from 6 to 7:30 p.m. And that not only steers kind of the way the rubric is, but it also kind of steers how the rubric feels itself within other equitable efforts going on in the neighborhood right now. And so then also, on an organizational level, we've been collecting endorsements from organizations that organizations believe that this framework is a good framework for city policy. And so when we go to kind of push to higher level decision makers, we want to make sure that we do have that grassroots base. And so we've been collecting organizational endorsements from different people, as well as organizations have been connecting us to other organizations who would likely be interested, or there are people, another base that we haven't connected with before. And then we've also been using community councils as one approach specifically to try to broaden our base and to demonstrate that this is a possible way forward when we think about equitable development. So when we think about kind of the way that it can be used within a community council, one way is that we just ask community councils to endorse it as a framework. So they would just fill out an endorsement form, and then from there they would just say that this is a good framework and this is good policy and we support this as policy. And then also we've seen that community councils will vote to endorse the rubric and then also ask developers to fill out the rubric and other different pieces that we have along with the rubric to bring transparency anytime a developer is in front of them asking for their support. So oftentimes the only time a developer is in front of a community council asking for their support is in the event of a liquor license or a zoning change. And so we think that using that small leverage point as a way to get the most transparent information as possible to the community council is one way that community councils can exert power with the limited amount that they're kind of given at this point. And then also kind of at one point or one level above that is that community councils can commit to a certain score. So we won't support this project unless this developer fills out these forms and commits to these certain expectations, and then they reach a certain score level on the rubric. So those are kind of the three pathways that community councils have the option of taking. And then that's the last thing kind of on my end, and then I just wanted to open up the floor for questions. In front of you there is just a small rundown of the rationale and then the approach and just the demands that we're asking as far as the Equitable Development Rubric. I also have the full project or the full package itself up here if anyone would like to look at it. And then also within this packet specifically, we just have the other ways that people can get involved, rather on an individual level, at an organizational level, or a community council level. And so I do want to open the floor for questions or areas of clarification as well. Yes, ma'am.
Congratulations. Up. And just touch it, touch the top. Just touch the top, it takes a couple seconds for it to warm. We don't have any magic.
I understand, congratulations, I think you have done a fantastic job. And my question is, I understand that some neighborhoods feel that it's too narrow, it doesn't fit their particular situation. And what is that opposition, and can you explain?
Yeah, so I think from what we've heard is that we presented recently at the Beekman Corridor, which includes the neighborhoods of North Fairmont, South Fairmont, Cumminsville, Millville, and English Woods. And they specifically, when we presented to them, they were like, well, this is great, like we don't feel like our neighborhoods should have to receive any specific type or any type of investment for the sake of investment, but we're trying to entice investment, and so we don't want to scare developers off. And I feel like a lot of the pushback is that if we ask for too much, it's hard to kind of switch from just giving away free carrots to selling carrots. So when we think about our tax or our public incentives, rather than it's just been given away so freely with no type of accountability, with no type of expectations connected to it. And so then in order to switch over to like, well, we expect we have certain expectations with our public backing, it's difficult for people to comprehend. They're afraid that developers will just run away and not want to invest in their neighborhood, period. And we just personally don't believe that by raising the bar, that all development is just going to flee away from the city. And so that's been a lot of the pushback in different neighborhoods that we've seen. Not necessarily pushback, but a concern that has been brought up.
If you will remember, a year and a half ago, when right after the city council election, David Mann was here. When he was asked specifically by Sue Mangan, basically said, you know, what about these developers coming in and basically making them do X, Y, and Z? Well, if we make them do that, they won't come. And our bottom line is, well, maybe we don't want them to come if they are not moral people and will not see to the needs of the community. And so that's probably the most important thing that they need to hear, because you just can't have any shyster come on into your neighborhood, because things will happen if that goes on. So the accountability piece is so very important.
Health and wellness component is very important. When your community's broken up, that's stressful. When you don't have a place to play and do recreational activities, that is causing stress and mental health problems. It exacerbates your health in general. So is there a health and wellness component, which is so important? And also, are you connected with Health Gap at all, or something like that?
I don't think that we're connected specifically with Health Gap, and we don't have a category that is dedicated to health and wellness. But recreation and public space has been a piece that has always been very important to us, specifically with that example I gave of the basketball courts, and just removing that recreational public space. And so we haven't necessarily targeted, I would say, specifically a health and wellness category, but I think that within our desire to maintain public space, and not only any type of public space, but specifically when we talk about community footprint, investing in community assets that are currently there. So rather, it could be a basketball court, it could be a public basketball court, or it could be a recreation center, or it could be a pool in the area. It's like those type of pinpointed areas in the neighborhood that the community would be the experts in knowing and addressing and informing the developer about, rather than the developer coming in and like wiping those those are often the first assets to go when we see development in neighborhoods. And so allowing the community to be the front drivers in development rather than the developer bringing things in the community kind of begging and scrapping for things on the back end is the hope with this tool. But we don't have something specifically addressing health and wellness rather than the public space and the public assets piece.
Go ahead.
Are there some developers at this point and some city council members?
Louder, please.
Are there some developers at this point and some city council members who think, oh boy, Peaslee's gonna be at the hearing, or oh my God, Peaslee's gonna be at the hearing? I mean, do people come, yeah, are you scaring people? Do people come to you in advance at this point?
We have had specific city council members reach out that have kind of gotten a hold. It's been making its way around City Hall, and I know that Councilmember Denard and Councilmember Landsman have shown interest not only in our tool, but also in addressing the way that public subsidies have been giving out in general. And so that has not kind of been our first approach, and we don't necessarily have like developers knocking down our door asking like, why are you doing this and why are you making my job harder at this point? But it's more of, we've just been trying to build a more grassroots on the ground base before going to City Hall, because our fear is that we go to City Hall first and then all of a sudden it's watered down to basically what we have now, and there's no type of raising the bar. And so we know that it's kind of making its way through City Hall. There's been some tweaks to it so far, and we're not necessarily interested in tweaking to make it easier to pass, because we feel like with the investment that the public has been making over the years, we need to raise the bar, and there needs to be an accountability and transparency piece. So that's kind of like our position right now, and we don't necessarily, most time when developers hear about this, they're not necessarily super excited and trying to get connected to this effort. So that hasn't really been a big push right now, rather than smaller CDCs who have kind of been looking at it and interested in ways that they could kind of do their type of development more equitably. So yeah.
Joelle, thank you for sharing this, and I like Dot over there. I think it's really wonderful that you created this rubric and you're promoting it, and I agree with you.
Louder, please.
I agree with you that a grassroots up, that this is what the community wants, and if we're starting to do that more and more, and a lot of issues, not just affordability, but a lot of things, maybe we can enact the change our society desperately needs at this point. But my question to you is, are there other community councils beyond the one from, I presume you're part of the Over the Rhine Community Council?
So we've been making waves. Specifically, we have one endorsement. We have it from Walnut Hills. And Walnut Hills has also been involved in, they're kind of on the second piece of requiring developers to fill out the rubric, as well as we have what's called a developer questionnaire, specifically asking the subsidies that developers are seeking. And from there, we've just had it moving in other community councils. So Over the Rhine, Madisonville, Northside, Lower Price Hill, the West End, and there's a few others, Evanston, and so it's Spring Grove Village. And so a lot of those community councils are looking specifically at the standards that we've established, and Spring Grove Village and Evanston in particular are currently working on their community plans with the city, and so they're looking at the standards that we have and interweaving those into their community plans. So we're still trying to work on the endorsement front, specifically from those community councils, because we've been heavily involved and we've presented at general body meetings and they've kind of stalled, so we've been kind of pushing to have the documented support, which is specifically what we're looking for. So those are kind of the community councils we've been looking at, as well as the ones I mentioned before within Millville, Cumminsville, South Fairmont, North Fairmont, and English Woods. So we're trying to get a broad, like not solely all gentrifying neighborhoods that are seeing development, but the fact that all neighborhoods, regardless of the level of investment, should see good investment when using their public subsidies.
I just want to say I think you're amazing. I think this is so smart to develop a rubric, and it just so makes so much sense. It's going to be hard to say no to this once the public understands it. But also, I was wondering, could you explain the different types of abatements, or do you want to go there? Because it's so confusing. The residential abatements come from the state. How can local groups affect those abatements? And how does that compare to development issues and the kind of abatements that go with commercial development, it's very complex. I don't know if you're in the mood or willing to go there, but I'd like to hear what you know about that.
Yeah, and I'm not as versed or as familiar with the specific abatements. The ones that the rubric specifically addresses is the commercial abatements. So when we think about not solely with mixed use, so either commercial on the bottom and residential on the top, or large level residential, oftentimes over 4 units. Those are the type of abatements that Over the Rhine has been seeing, and then also a lot of other neighborhoods such as Walnut Hills and Madisonville with larger level developments. And so those commercial abatements are from what I understand, like the larger scale that address a specific number of units of housing or a specific number of square footage. Residential abatements, from my understanding, is issued by the state, and then also have other levels of not requirements, but when you think about like people are able to get residential abatements for environmental standards that have more kind of requirements related to them. But I don't want to speak, I guess, too much on the abatements because I'm not as familiar with those. And I know that's been a large conversation with the Cincinnati Educational Justice Coalition that has been doing a lot of work on the ground with those type of abatements. But specifically, the rubric would address the commercial abatements and not the residential or owner-occupied abatements.
We are working on that residential piece because in 2018 alone, the residential abatements in Hamilton County came up to $22 million. That's $22 million that they are not paying, but those of us without abatements are paying their taxes. So in other words, when you have, a levy for the zoo and it's supposed to bring in 3 mills, those 3 mills are still going to come in. And when you don't have $22 million coming from this residential tax abatement, it's coming from the backs of the rest of us. So make sure that you understand the residential tax abatements are really a hot mess because they're going in mainly these very plush neighborhoods. The facts, it's $22 million in 2018 alone, and this comes directly from the CPS lawyer. $22 million is what the residential tax abatement, that's what they did not pay. But the rest of us are paying their taxes. That's really bad.
Do you have any comments on the FC Stadium controversy? And also you mentioned 2,300 homes were displaced by OTR development. Where do those people go after that?
Typically, to address the last end of your question, those people who are on the lowest end of the affordability just go to the next neighborhood that has seen disinvestment that has subpar housing, but they're able to take their families to. So we've seen neighbors move to just different neighborhoods throughout that haven't seen a lot of investment as the history of Over the Rhine. But regarding FC, at least in thinking about the rubric, the lack of community engagement, but then also the fact that the community specifically, they specified that they didn't necessarily want that in their community and they proceeded anyway, would automatically not score well on our tool. Because we see the community and the stakeholders within the community as the experts in their field, because those are the people that live there, those are the people that work there, those are the people who have been investing in that neighborhood when there were no other market or other levels of investment. So that within itself would not score well on our rubric. And then also the community benefits that they're bringing. It's just difficult when the city takes the leverage from under the community. So if you're still negotiating a community benefits agreement and what is this project going to bring to our community, but then the incentives or the subsidies is given to that developer and those negotiations are still in talks, you sell the community's leverage from under them. So now there's really nothing holding the developer or whoever to the community standards, or they no longer have their negotiating or their bargaining chip. So that again, within like our community input piece or our community footprint piece, just would not, it would just not score well or would not be a way to act in good faith in the type of business that you want to do in a community.
Please repeat that, 2,300 forced-out OTR when?
That was between the year 2000, I'm pretty sure 2002 to 2015. And that was from the CDI, I can't think of the name, but they did a study on Over the Rhine and the way that development has impacted the affordability of the neighborhood. And there were 2,300 units, and that not only impacted the socioeconomic demographics of the neighborhood, but also the racial demographics of the
Those are
neighborhood.
people or units of housing?
Units of housing. Now, the number of people, I'm not exactly sure. It was a little over 2,300 units of housing, though.
It's probably even more the last couple of years. Right?
Yeah,
It's probably
between
some.
2015 and 2019, there hasn't been another study. Over the Rhine specifically is currently in the process of updating that study. But I already know that there's probably been at least, yeah, there's been plenty more since then.
Hi, good to see you again. I'm a huge fan of Peaslee Neighborhood Center and wanted to share with you that I've been sending the rubric around to some people on city council and our school board. Last night at the school board meeting, they did another reading of their resolution regarding renegotiating the 99 agreement. And I was happy to say that a brief I wrote, I saw language from that in the resolution, so that was awesome. But I also wanted to ask, how do you feel about candidates for office endorsing the rubric? Because all I need to do is sign and date it.
Oh, and that's something I feel like we probably need you on like our steering committee, because like we've been talking on our steering committee for a while, like should we be doing personal where people can endorse or sign a petition? Should we solely be doing the organization and the community council drive? And I feel like that's still up in the air. From now, we're currently, I guess, on organization and community council. But I don't know if a petition would be better, not only connecting people, but like you said, like people running for public office and having like public officials take a stance on how they see like more equitable development. Let me talk to my supervisor and get back to you.
Thank you.
Hello, question. Have you had any conversations with 3C, DC, and if so, how did those go?
We have not specifically had conversations with 3CDC regarding the rubric. We have run a few 3CDC based projects through the rubric, and just to see when we were initially testing it out to see are our standards too high, are they too low, to test out how different projects would fare on the rubric. And so kind of between the initial plan for the Keep Our Courts group and a few 3CDC projects, and then also compared to our local CDC, Over the Rhine Community Housing, and the way that they've done development, we've run through the rubric, but we haven't had any direct conversations with 3CDC. We presented to LISC, and so within that meeting, there were local CDCs that we were able to connect with, but yeah, we haven't connected with 3CDC on this.
I have the mic, sorry. I have a question about green and being like the stuff that's been done in Price Hill as far as having a green footprint and sustainability in that area. Is that included?
Yeah, so we have, in the bonus section, we have under natural environment, which is mostly under like LEED certifications. So that has kind of been in our bonus category, but it hasn't been like into one of our main categories because we don't necessarily see that as a way of addressing the race and class equity issues that Cincinnati has, but we do see it as an important piece when we talk about the way development is done equitably and, like you mentioned, sustainably. So yeah, we do have those standards and expectations within the bonus category, and then also oftentimes when neighborhoods mention things like within the community input section, that type of input is like weighed more highly based on what the community has mentioned.
Hi, I was late, I missed part of your presentation, I'm sorry, but I was glad to hear the mention of 3CDC. I'm wondering if people are familiar with that history. They and people associated with them bought up the housing decades ago and held on to it, and then received a big boatload of tax abatements. Now, they say that the housing was empty that they bought, but I'm sure some of it was, but otherwise. And I'm wondering, is there a way that we could head this off at the pass in our, because that's a done deal, but head this off at the pass in the future to prevent that, because they're millionaires, maybe billionaires now. I'm wondering if we can figure that out for our other neighborhoods. And I'm happy to hear about inspiring activism with people. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. From just what we've seen in Over the Rhine with 3CDC and other developers, a lot of times, you know, there's this saying like, oh, we're not displacing anyone directly. But oftentimes the buildings, there was, in that study within, the finding was that 2,300 units of housing was lost at the lowest level. There was a study done on like the basis of, well, how many people could be living in Over the Rhine based on our current number of units and then our units of availability. So like units that like, oh, maybe it doesn't have appliances or it just needs a new roof on the building and those type of things. But those are often the buildings, like those buildings that would need a little bit of more investment. Those are not the buildings that people were buying up to renovate to bring more people without the displacement. And so we're hoping within this grassroots support that we're able to that other neighborhoods don't have to experience what Over the Rhine experience with the massive displacement, with the mass loss of affordable housing, and with the change of affordability within the neighborhood. And so we're just hoping to kind of rally people around asking for more within the development that is being brought to their neighborhood, because a lot of times it's like, oh, that's not going to happen in my neighborhood until it does. And so one way that Over the Rhine specifically was able to kind of counter that a little bit was through community-based like buying of land. So through Over the Rhine Community Housing, they were able to buy buildings and dedicate those buildings to affordable housing, which was their specific call. And so just having community control within your neighborhood is one way in particular to kind of combat things, but that takes capital. And so that's the issue with it, you know. So just in Over the Rhine, Over the Rhine Community Housing, and Peaslee is involved in this just activism, this grassroots on the ground activism. And so they, you know, people just making a way out of no way, but that saw the changes coming and were like, well, we have to do something. So they wanted to make sure that they had community control within their neighborhood. And currently, it was because of those activists that in certain areas of the neighborhood, we still are able to retain a level of affordable housing. And without that type of activism, that affordable housing would not be there.
Just a very small follow-up in that exact same vein. Has there been any move or any involvement in demanding that the people that are doing the gentrification put aside by the percentages an amount for low income, like what has happened in New York and what has happened in other big cities, that they were allowed to build and such, but a certain percentage of the building needed to be low housing, and then what they did was they made the entrance for the low housing people in the back of a building. However, they didn't like that and that changed as well. But anyway, has there been any move for that?
That's kind of how we see this piece particular, the rubric when we think about inclusionary housing, so including low-income housing with a certain level of higher income housing. So just, we have it subsidy connected. A lot of areas like New York have it mandated. We've also been working with the Affordable Housing Advocates Tax, Affordable Housing Tax, or Affordable Housing Trust Fund, sorry, to see are there ways to fund the trust fund, because the trust fund currently doesn't have a consistent revenue source. Are there ways to fund the trust fund consistently and then also have these developers need to contribute a certain percentage into that trust fund in order to develop affordable housing. So we've been working with that campaign specifically. There have been a lot of people working on finding a revenue source that is consistently funding the trust fund, but then also like other ways to get contributions to the trust fund.
Two more questions, Peter.
Okay, this may be off the wall, but your focus on capital has really reminded me of the whole debate over reparations. I thought Denise Coates' article 5 years ago was all about dirty tricks in housing, and a recent interview with him was also focusing on the new plus, in a sense, that there is actually a debate going on with House Bill 40. And it seems to me, in a way, you have a kind of model of what would represent genuinely community-controlled use of meaningful capital to undo some of the horrible things over the centuries that have
Can't hear you, Peter.
put people in situations where they are vulnerable, where the housing gets stolen, or the housing is absolutely mediocre, or what Denise Coates' original thing, where there's some sort of trick to prevent black people who have enough money to buy a house from actually owning it. Anyway, it seems to me that you have some wonderful models here for something that would, if you just had the capital that you could control, you have some model of community control.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. That's honestly, I feel like that is such a compliment, like in thinking about the case for reparations. And somebody just, handed me an article about someone else addressing reparations. But I do think that in order to address the inequities and the inequalities that have historically impacted poorer communities, communities of color, not only in Cincinnati but around the United States, it's important that we have a type of community control, especially with an influx of capital, but that capital is completely whitewashing the history of certain groups of people. They're removing resources and making it difficult for certain demographics or certain people to live in their spaces, historically their spaces, so just addressing those. And then, like you said, investing that capital that we have rather in the people who have been investing in their communities when there was no capital. So seeing that as an investment, not solely through financial capital, but using our financial capital to invest in those areas. So yeah, thank you for that.
I just want to say you need to be careful about definitions. There's a 3CDC says, oh, we have 15% of our units that we're building are affordable, but they're using the average median income of the county, which is $50,000. And so you need to earn, over $40,000 a year. So their average affordable unit's $800 or $1,100 a month. And what you really need is to use a percentage from poverty. It has to be, that you don't spend more than 30% of your income, whatever it is, for your rent. That's as the federal standard, but when you talk about affordable housing, you need to be thinking about the percentage of income of the poverty line rather than the national or the Hamilton County average or something, because the Hamilton County average puts affordable income at $800 a month for your apartment.
Mm-hmm. And that's what we've been seeing a lot of with that 80% area median income. It's just people are like, oh, well, we have workforce, so we have affordable housing, and those, I'm pretty sure that stat is $1,000 a month for a one-bedroom apartment is considered affordable housing.
On July 23rd, John Schreider from Legal Aid is going to come talk to us about the status of affordable housing and what it is and how many units that have been removed and come back. And save your questions, because on July 23rd he'll be here. He'll actually be at St. John's Unitarian Church that day, but he's going to be answering your questions.
Now, I have to tell you, I see another couple of questions out there, and Joelle isn't smart enough to run out of here right at the end. That she will be here to answer your questions if you kind of come up here and you can get your questions answered right in person. So don't feel as though we're turning you off. We're just keeping her hostage, and it's okay. I think Joelle has done a marvelous job today. Let us say thank you. And you have been a wonderful audience. Now I have to warn you that next week we will not be here. We will be at the First Unitarian Church. Please take away something that has the address on it. There are papers in the back.
Off
And
of
leave-
Reading Road.
Off of Reading Road.
Please, your lunch reservations, your orders for lunch, please do not leave until you give that to me. Okay, or else you may not have a lunch. And also Dick Bozian is going to be our speaker next week. His topic is, and this ties into everything, the social consequences of economic
Inequality.
inequality. So in other words, the social consequences of everything we're talking about.
So he'd come here, Dick Bozian, who's been around a long time and can tell us about it. So please come next week to the First Unitarian Church and give your passes to Katie.